family. Welcome back to Paradigm Shift TV 314. I'm your host, Piankhi Ptah, Mutulu, Nefer, Amun-Ra. And we are back with our brother, Jerome, the conscious Christian Green. And he is here to respond to some of the things I said during my interview with Jamal, the Pan-African Wilkerson. But before we get back to our brother, let me do my usual welcome. And that is Hotep to all my Kemetic brothers and sisters. Shalom to all my Hebrew brothers and sisters. God bless to all my Christian brothers and sisters. Islam to all my Moors. Assalamu alaikum to all my brothers and sisters in the NOI movement. And Jambo to all my brothers and sisters throughout the African diaspora in this country and beyond. I say that welcome because if you are Black, I am with you, and I hope that you are with me. And our differences in ideology should not apply. That said, our brother Jerome, the conscious Christian, is back with us, and you have something you want to get off your chest, brother. The floor is yours.
All right. First of all, I want to greet you and, greet everybody who's listening. I got a chance to check out the interview with Brother Jamal, and there were a couple of things that were said that I feel like I need to kind of respond to. The first thing is I want to address the comment that Brother Jamal made that I don't necessarily use primary sources. What I'm using is a secondary source. I don't necessarily think, and I could be wrong, I don't think he understands what a primary source is and what a secondary source does for the primary source. So I'm gonna kind of give some examples of a primary source and what it is, and of a secondary source and what that is, and how it relates to a primary source. So guess I'll get started. A primary source, is basically the original source of information about a topic, basically, or a subject. And some examples of primary sources are published books, journals, letters, newspapers, magazines, etc. Now, what a secondary source does in relation to a primary source, what it does is it summarizes, evaluates, or interprets primary sources. So some examples of secondary sources are, bibliographies at the back of certain, published books or journals or whatever, reference books, dictionaries, encyclopedias, certain articles from magazines and newspapers and such. So when I tell him I'm using primary sources and he's accusing me of using secondary sources and not primary sources, due to the fact that I wasn't there when the primary source was created, that is automatically a secondary source, and I don't think that's right and exact.
Now let me ask you this, because I'm thinking that the brother may know what a primary source and a secondary source is. I'm just thinking that in his particular philosophy, or ideology, he would rather know what you think about a particular topic as opposed to what he probably would consider. And I'm just guessing. I'll follow up with him, but I'm assuming that with regards to his personal philosophy or ideology, that he believes that he would rather know what you believe and what your opinion is as opposed to what the source is saying or the secondary source, etc. If do that make sense?
Yeah, I got you. And I actually appreciate you clearing that up. Because I mean, I understand where he's coming from, and everything that comes out of my mouth isn't from a primary source or a secondary source. I use my faculty of reasoning and logical thought to formulate my own interpretation. So everything I say is not based on a book or anything, you know what I'm saying, of that sort. I guess it may come off like that, and maybe because of some of the terminology that I use, it may come off as that to him, but that's not always the case. So maybe there's just a misunderstanding on his part about how I can present my argument or my view on a certain subject or topic.
Yeah, because I think like clearly when we dealing with scholarship and we dealing with information, primaries, secondaries are obviously important. But then I know that for some people, there is a belief that we should lean more to our own interpretation, and I'm kind of thinking that that's where our brother is sort of coming from. Again, now, I would have to clarify that with him, but I'm just assuming based on other conversations I've had with other brothers and sisters, and based on the conversation I had with him, that may perhaps be where he's coming from. In a situation like that, though, where would you go with a dialogue or a discussion or a debate with him if he more or less doesn't adhere to appealing to authority, so to speak, but would rather just deal with your personal attestation?
That's really not a problem. Like it just depends on what the subject is, because certain subjects warrant the use of primary source documentation, secondary source documentation, certain quotations and stuff like that. So it wouldn't bother me if we just going back and forth about our opinions, but opinions and biases don't always equal facts.
Yeah, and that's real. And I think that when we, we would kind of have to establish then what kind of debate or discussion we having. Are we having a scholarly debate, a scholarly discussion, or are we just talking about our own opinions and ideas? And I think once we establish that, then we could sort of move forward, in the conversation. But
yeah, I feel you, because it's like, and not to cut you off, but if we're talking about issues in the Black community and how we can improve our communities or our town or whatever, of course we don't need a primary source or a secondary source to have a conversation about that. We coming up with ideas off the dome, you know what I'm saying? So if that's what he's referring to, then I never use primary sources and secondary sources when I'm having those conversations, because I don't need to. Because I'm I'm in the Black community. I see what's going on.
Yeah, I think that's kind of, you know, what we would have to sort of move with regards to that type of conversation. Now you two are in the same area, and you guys have actually have worked together. I think both of you said as much in each of your discussions the past couple of days. Speak to sort of how y'all linked up and sort of the sort of things that y'all was trying to get done.
Okay. Well, I met Jamal a few years ago. As a matter of fact, it's been, I think, over 3 years now. And I was still in the conscious community when I met him. And even though we in the same town, we met via Facebook Messenger. He shot me a message on Facebook, and, you know, we got to dialoguing about, you know, what's going on in the Black community and stuff like that. And, you know, so we met up and we started kind of strategizing about, you know, what we could do to, you know, start a movement that would advocate for the improvement and progression of the Black community in Orangeburg, South Carolina. And what we both decided upon was we were going to start our own Pan-African movement. And we had came up with the slogan, and you know, we were coming up with other ideas to try to get it off the ground. And we would meet up periodically and just discuss what we should do in regards to that movement. Now, when I gave my life to Christ, that didn't cause a rift between us per se, but it did put a halt on the Pan-African movement, because we would, at sometimes via Facebook, we would be going like back and forth about certain things I would post from a Christian perspective, and certain things he would post from, I wouldn't say a Pan-African perspective, but the perspective of the conscious community, because some of the stuff he posted, I saw the same stuff in the conscious community, so I could kind of address it. But we still ended up working together and doing activist work. In my introduction recording, I told you about how we staged a protest against gun violence, and we staged a protest against the Confederate flag being displayed in front of the creamery in Orangeburg.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's pretty much how we got up.
So would you say that there was a rift? You said it wasn't really a rift. Go into that with regards to how things sort of changed once you, I guess, left the conscious community.
Well, what I can tell you, Brother Pianhki, is that when I left the conscious community, my scope was broadened, you know what I'm saying, significantly. You know, I kind of had this, when I was in the conscious community, I had this narrow view. I was just going to develop a worldview that was purely Afrocentric. and purely centered around Afrocentricity itself. But once I gave my life to Christ, I started reading the scriptures, and I started delving in more into what the Christian philosophy or what the Christian doctrine entails. It kind of broadened my scope, and it taught me that I didn't have to just have an Afrocentric worldview in regards to how I view life itself and everything associated with life. So that kind of, and I really can't say that I backed away from the idea. It wasn't at the forefront of what I was trying to do after I gave my life to Christ. Just the movement itself, I was still down for, protesting against, gun violence, racism, you know what I'm saying, symbols of racism and things of that nature. But the Pan-African movement was kind of put on the back burner in my mind. When I had actually given my life to Christ and started, delving into Christianity, and he never actually brought it back up. So it's not something that's completely off the table, because I know that, Christianity has a big stake in the Pan-African movement itself, but it's just something that we basically never went through with.
Yeah. Now, what do you say to Pan-Africans like myself, like Brother Jamal and others who are not Christian? What do you say to them regarding the fact that Marcus Garvey, who most consider the founder of the Pan-African movement, what do you say to them regarding the fact that he was a Christian?
Well, Pan-Africanism as a concept is not exclusive to Christianity, even though one of the figureheads in the development of Pan-Africanism was Marcus Garvey, and he was a Christian, and he made it known. It was for all Black people, regardless of what they believed. It was a concept that I believe is very necessary, because it brings us together as a people in the diaspora. And it also, in a way, connects us to our African roots. So what I would say to a brother like you and a brother like Jamal, two brothers who aren't Christian but adhere to or subscribe to the concept of Pan-Africanism, is that as long as you don't, as long as you don't disrespect the Christian aspect of Pan-Africanism, because, like I said, Garvey made it known that he was a Christian, that he believed in the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and that he believed in the Apostolic Creed. So I shouldn't have a problem. I don't have a problem with it. I shouldn't have a problem with it in that regard, as long as there's no disrespect towards Marcus Garvey and what he believed as a Christian.
Right. Well, the reason I asked that is because it would seem like there shouldn't be an issue with you being a Pan-African and being a Christian at the same time, considering Marcus Garvey was a Christian. And so that was my sort of motive for asking you the question, because if the founder was Christian, then you being a Christian definitely shouldn't be an issue. And so, because I don't think anybody can disregard what Marcus Garvey was. Now, I believe that being Pan-African came front and center, above any spiritual belief, but he didn't, as you said, he didn't hide the fact that he was a Christian. What else was on your mind with regards to the interview, my brother?
Just some because it started off pretty good. Now, I was listening, and it was a pretty good interview overall. I like most of what was said in regards to what's going on in the Black community and things of that nature. But there were some shots thrown at Christianity that, of course, I'm not going to necessarily agree with. And it's just, I think some of it is based upon misconceptions and misinterpretations in regards to Christianity. I guess some people think that Christianity causes our people to regress in a way. It causes our people to somehow be weak and docile in the face of what's going on. And of course, that's not the case, because history suggests different. And even in modern times, you have people within the Christian faith that are ardently opposed to the injustices that are befalling and have befallen Black people since we've arrived in this country. One of the things was it was a quote I think you said near the beginning. I think it may have been 10, 15 minutes into the interview. And you said that holding on to a spiritual belief that got you past a certain point is like carrying a raft once you cross the river. Now, that gives you something to kind of chew on and think about. But what I want to ask you is, and I quote my brother Adam Coleman from True ID Podcast, two things. Are we as a people really out of the water, so to speak? And another question is, if we put the raft down because we found dry ground, what's going to happen when we come to another body of water? Or if we come to another body of water, because that's not definitive, but hypothetically speaking.
Both good questions. Both good questions. Now, as far as us being out of water, I think the water, when I make that statement, I think the water that we were in is slavery, Jim Crow, and systemic and systematic racism with no rights and no regard for our lives on a mass scale and on a public scale. In other words, there was no outrage at the taking of a Black life. There was no outcry. You see, what regardless of what many people think and believe, You do something to a black person now, whether the consequences fit the crime or not, there will be some outcry and some consequences. Now, we know that 9 times out of 10, nothing is going to happen to the cop. A lot of times, nothing is going to happen to the civilian. But there will be a sentiment of repercussions. Whereas, you know, when my grandmother was not my age, but you know, 15, 16 years old, it wouldn't even, you might as well had ran over a squirrel if you killed a black person. So what's my point in saying that? I believe that Christianity was used as a catalyst to get us past those points, be it slavery, be it Jim Crow, be it segregation. Regardless of what you think of segregation, I myself think we should have stayed separated, but that's a different topic. I firmly believe that the establishment of the Black church by Richard Allen and Absalom Jones and others who sort of established what we know as the modern Black church. I think that that was absolutely pivotal in us moving forward. We didn't know anything else, though. We didn't know our history as a people. We didn't know our lineage. That had all been taken away from us. You see, a lot of people sort of reach back and they talk about this narrative of Africa, Christianity was in Africa. And whether or not that's true or not, I know it was definitely in Kemet or what by then had became Egypt and Northeast Africa. Whether or not it was in Central and West Africa, I think is still questionable. Now, I know you said this is coming out to say otherwise, and you know, we'll figure that out as that information sort of comes to light. But we know that once we got on those ships and in those dungeons and we got over here, everything that our ancestors were was stripped away from them. They were given names like my government name, Douglas and Monroe, and all of these different idioms, and their African identity was taken away. But as we started to rediscover I feel like there's no longer a requirement to hold on to what we used to survive. And what we used to survive was Christianity. Now, for some people, they need to hold on to it probably indefinitely or for the rest of their life. But for others, once I've used it to a certain point and now I've discovered who I really am, then why hold on to this previous identity as opposed to exploring who I really am? It's kind of like a child who was stolen from their parents during their infancy, and the parents who raised them not only stole them, but they don't treat them well, right? But there are times when, you know, let's say one parent doesn't treat them well, but the other parent does. And so there are pleasant moments and there are good moments. As they grow up and they find out that they're adopted or they were taken, so to speak. Let's just go with adopted. We're not going to even say taken. We're just going to say adopted. And you got one parent who seems to despise you and the other one who seems to love you. Once you find out that you were adopted, 9 times out of 10, you're going to explore where you really came from and who you really are. And you're going to look into what it is that makes you, you. And while you may hold on to some tenets of those parents that you grew up with, you definitely going to explore your original origins, and those things in that original origin that are beneficial to you, you're gonna use them. I think that same thing can be said about African spiritual concepts and beliefs versus Christianity in this country. So with regards to whether or not we out of water, I think when we look at slavery and we look at our position today versus our position then, where we can own businesses, we can move about this world in a way where we are independent of the European. To a degree, we're out of water. We're still under a white supremacist society. So we may never truly get out of water. But from a metaphorical standpoint, once we've discovered who we are and who we truly were meant to be, I think it would be disrespectful to those people who lost their lives in the Middle Passage, in those slave dungeons, who were kidnapped, to not explore our true origins, our true beliefs, our true social mores and folkways, as the great Khalid Muhammad would say. I think it would be disrespectful to them not to explore that. And so, on one hand, I want to say, no, we never really gonna be out of the water. But on the other hand, I think that we can learn to swim with our original identity and our original purposes, being in Africa with those African concepts and ideologies. And we can leave behind what our oppressor decided to force on us and use against us in a degrading, barbaric, and fashion. And that's not to disrespect those who want to hold on to it and stay in that raft. But I think some of us just decided to swim, and some of us decided to stay on the raft. Now, as far as what remind me again, what was the second question?
Oh, the second question was, if you put the raft down that help you to get over that first body of water, hypothetically, what if you come or encounter another body of water?
Well, again, and I go back to our African origins and spiritual beliefs. I think that that's a completely different type of raft or boat that we can now use to get across that body of water. I think that perhaps we can even swim, so to speak, as I said in my explanation for the last question. And so I say that with supreme respect for where Christianity helped us get to. But I think that at this point, it's kind of like if you break your leg, you're gonna be on crutches for a while, and you need that crutch or that cane. But once your leg heals, you're not gonna keep using that crutch or that cane. You're gonna walk on your own. And I think Christianity, to a degree, has been a crutch for our people. And so, for your analogy of what if we come up on another body of water, well, at some point, we got to learn to swim. And we either going to swim or drown and I'd rather drown based on what myself and my ancestors believed and encompassed, as opposed to what my oppressor gave me and forced on me under false pretenses or pretenses of oppression. And so from that regard, if I don't have another raft, or if I'm unable to build another raft, then I just got to use what I've attained of my original self and the knowledge I've attained of myself from the continent of which my people originated, and sink or swim. And if I drown, I drowned an African, Black and proud. And if I swim and I make it, then I'm even more so. But I gotta do it under my own merit and under my own guise and identity, as opposed to what someone who never meant me any good decided to get me and force on me and use ultimately to oppress me. And I hope that answer makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. And what I will say is that, and you may not totally agree, but with the length of time that Christianity has been on the continent of Africa in various places, you can almost call it an African indigenous religion to a degree. Now, I get the part where you're saying that with the length of time that Christianity has been on the continent of Africa in various places, you can almost refer to Christianity as an indigenous African religion or tradition.
Stop it, bro.
But that's just my opinion.
Stop it. Come on, man. Come on. Okay, now let me say this. What we do know about Christianity and Islam is that in Africa, they've been colonized to a higher degree than even we have over here. And I say that because the Pan-African movement started in America. And we've been the ones who practice Sankofa, which means to look back or to reach back, turn back, etc. We practice Kuchi Chakalia with regards to naming ourselves and establishing these African practices and African philosophies, because on the continent, and I'll give you two prime examples. I work with an African woman, beautiful sister, very, very sweet, very gracious, but she a diehard Christian. And she'd been a Christian her whole life. And if you say anything against her Jesus, she'll mess around and karate kick you. And I'm not exaggerating. She was serious about it. And she has no concept of African spirituality, African culture, or otherwise. And she from Nigeria. And it's like, how could that be? What you find out is when you start studying the history, when these countries start coming into Africa and they start colonizing these people, they brought their religion with them. And so half of Africa is majority Muslim and the other half is majority Christian, because they have thoroughly colonized the continent. It's a brother who worked at the gas station around the corner from my house. I had an uncle. No, I had a Jinname on, which simply means God is omnipresent. But it's an African Adinkra symbol. And he told me it was pagan. It wasn't a Muslim. it isn't Muslim. You shouldn't wear things that try to explain God or Allah. And so my point being, he was from Ghana. So just on the continent alone, you have two different perspectives, and the people who still practice indigenous African traditions are ostracized and looked at as if they are doing something evil and wrong. And so it's not because Christianity has been so good to these people that they just started practicing it. No, it was a colonization process, the same way with Islam. And so, whereas I hear you when you say it should almost be an indigenous belief, that's not the case. No, it's a colonized. It was brought there through colonization. And now I know that there is this notion that Christianity was somehow partly established in Africa. And whether that's true or not has yet to be determined, in my opinion. But even if that's the case, we have to agree that that's no longer the case on the continent with regards to whatever was being taught in the ancient world and what's being taught now. It's not the same. Because you literally I've heard quotes from brothers like Kaba Hiawatha Kamene and another brother, Jeremiah, I always butcher his last name, Karuma, I believe is his last name, where some African people on a Sunday, if they on their way to church and they see a white person, they say, go back home, because if they saw a white person, they already seen God. You have these huge sculptures of a white Jesus in these African countries, in these African villages. You got a white man walking around dressed as Jesus, and he being followed by hundreds of thousands of people, or hundreds of people, because they actually believe that this white man is God. And so this is a deep neurological misadventure when we start talking about what's going on the continent. Now, I'm not saying that the entire continent is this way, but it's a large swath that is. But I'm gonna let you have the floor.
Okay, like I see where you're coming from. With your take on it. Of course, when I say that, when I talk about the length of time that Christianity has been on the continent of Africa, of course, I'm talking about places like Ethiopia, Nubia, Egypt, or Kemet, long before there was any colonization going on the continent. Now, with regards to what's going on in parts of West Africa as a result of colonization, now that I don't agree with that at all. I don't agree with the fact that there are statues of a white Jesus in places in West Africa. I don't like the fact that those people in Africa actually think that Jesus is white. And I know that's a direct result of colonization. But a couple of things I will say is that not everybody in West Africa, well, not all areas of West Africa were introduced to Christianity via colonization and via their encounters with Europeans. And another thing is that, I just had a brain fart. What was I going Let's see. Oh man. Oh yeah. What I was going to say is that during the times where you had European missionaries going into Africa, a lot of these missionaries, well, some of these missionaries, I won't say a lot because I don't know the actual consensus, but some of these missionaries were going into certain tribal areas, and they were not there to colonize Africans, but they were there purely to preach the gospel. And they didn't force the gospel on these particular African tribes. They explained, or they evangelized, and the Africans actually accepted the gospel freely. You know what I'm saying? And these missionaries were actually the ones who stood in the way of slave trading that was going on the continent of Africa, in which some Africans did participate in. So it's not all negative when you talk about how the Europeans came and presented the gospel to West Africans, Central Africans, and the like. But another thing is that when you talk about the Yoruba people and how they encounter Christianity, there's actually a notion, and I don't know how true it is, I'm just throwing it out there, that the Yoruba people were introduced to Christianity not by Europeans, but by the Coptic Christians from Egypt or Kemet. And the reason why they were able to be introduced to Christianity by these Coptic Christians from Kemet is because they had a long-standing relationship with Kemet and the people of Kemet going all the way back to the pre-dynastic period. So, and then you have the people of the Congo who were Christians before colonization, Christians before the slave trade. And actually there's information, and I wish I could share it, but I don't have it at hand. But there's a document that surfaced recently that says that the Catholics who came into Congo were actually upset because they found that these Congolese people were already Christian. And I'm talking about thousands and thousands of Congolese people who were already Christians before colonization, before the slave trade. So, and then when it comes to the Congolese people, you have to remember the Stono Rebellion as one of the largest slave rebellions that ever took place. And the Congolese people that enacted the rebellion were Christians. So, you know, there's some positive aspects when you talk about Christianity in West Africa and how it got there, and how some West Africans were introduced to Christianity.
Well, I'm gonna be honest with you. I don't see anything positive Europeans coming into Africa. I don't. Whether it's Christian or otherwise, I don't see anything positive about it. Now, I know you say that these missionaries came, I guess you believe, with honorable intent, but that's based on whose account? Because how can we say that their account can be trusted? Number one. Number two, we always tend to say, and you and I have had these discussions several times. We always talk about participated in the slave trade, and that's fine. But again, we have to be clear on the fact that just like Europeans enslaved Europeans based on the fact that they didn't consider themselves the same people, that was the same way that it was in Africa. There were co-conspirators to the slave trade who were African, but there was very rarely, if at all, were you going to find someone who was a Congolese person enslaving another Congolese person and then selling them off. What you had was different tribes who were already in conflicts with other tribes, selling those tribes off whom they had defeated, be it prisoners of war or otherwise. And so these weren't the same people. I always have to feel like I have to clear that up because, again, you never heard white people enslaved white people or Europeans enslaved Europeans, even though Rome enslaved the Gauls, the Germans, the Franks, and everybody else that was in their path, and they were all white. But we never heard that. But we always hear that the Africans enslaved the Africans, as if all Africans are the same people. No, we get the Europeans the respect to say these were different people with different cultures and different social constructs, but we don't want to do that with Africans because somehow we have to say that Africans enslaved Africans as if it lets Europeans off the hook. Not saying that that's what you're necessarily doing, but that's the narrative that could sort of encapsulate. And so I want to be clear on the fact that these were different groups of people with different social constructs, different beliefs, who were most times at odds with each other. And that's why there was not a hesitation in them participating in the quote unquote slave trade, number one. Number two, when it came to these Europeans, if we're looking at their account of what happened, I don't trust it. The reason I don't trust it is, what good has the European coming into Africa did for Africa? I literally can't think of one thing. I can't think of one thing. Because we're talking about people who have come into Africa, created borders, and extracted all of Africa's natural resources and used it to their advantage. I can't think of one thing positive that came out of it. And so if they saying that they did these things, fine. But I heard it from somebody besides them, number one. But the other part of that is, what is it about these excursions into Africa by religious people that made them believe that these Africans needed their souls saved in the first place? Because it seemed to me that the people in Africa was doing just fine before the European set foot on the continent. And so what was the motivation behind that? And because you talk about the Congolese people and how the Catholic Church was upset about them already being Christians, but the history that I've read says that in, I can't remember if it was Spain or Portugal, but they had a large hand in them becoming Christian. And then enslaving those very people to the point where the king was pleading with the Spanish or the Portuguese king to stop the enslavement of his people, because he didn't understand him understanding the supposed tenets of Christianity. He couldn't understand why they were enslaving their people, and they were all Christian. And these were Catholic.
Say that again. I didn't get the beginning part of.
When you were talking about the Catholic Church being surprised that the Congolese people were already Christian. Well, that's that part I'm confused about, because I can't remember if it was Spain or Portuguese. I want to say it was Portuguese who, from what I understood, had a huge huge impact on them being Christian, or either staying Christian, and they started enslaving Congolese people. The king in the Congo actually wrote the king in Portugal, trying to figure out why was his people enslaving the Congolese people, and they were all Christian, only to kind of had the king in Portugal sort of dance around the question and ignore them. And the narrative is totally confused and totally and utterly vexed by the fact that if we are Christian brothers and sisters, why is it okay for them to enslave our people? Because he just couldn't understand it under the tenets of Christianity. And so that backfired on those people. And so my point is, when we look at the current state of Africa, the past state of Africa, Christianity has not been that beneficial, if it's been beneficial at all. Even when we look at Alexandria and in what we know as Egypt now, and we look at how Christianity, everybody loved to say Christianity had a huge impact on that country, and it did. The Coptic Christians, all of that. But look at how these people conducted themselves. Jabari brought this up in his debate with Dr. Bantu, and how they killed the philosopher Hypatia. And she wasn't the only person who they did like this. She's just the most popular and the most public person who they basically butchered. So when we talk about Christianity in Africa, we talk about it as if it was this benevolent and uplifting force, when it was actually a violent and heinous movement in more ways than one. And so I don't see a positive in its coming into the continent. As far as I'm concerned, it should have stayed where it was and left my people alone, because these incursions into Africa in the name of Jesus is how Africans got enslaved in the first place. I'm gonna give you the floor.
Okay. Well, if you're going to reject the fact that some missionaries that came into parts of West Africa didn't do so in the name of colonization, based on the fact that account is given by Europeans.
Let me be clear. I'm not saying that it's not true. I'm just saying that we can't take the Europeans' word for it. Like, just for example, if we were going off the European word, we would have to say that Jesus was a European man, right? Just based on how they depict him alone. So I'm not saying it to be facetious. I'm saying it because it's not. They haven't been the most trustworthy when it comes to these things. Athanasius and Arius, from what I'm told by some black scholars, these men were black. But when I look at them on my history book, they're white. You understand what I'm saying? So I'm not trying to be facetious when I say I don't trust it. I'm just look at the history of the people who we talking about. But I apologize for cutting you off. Go ahead.
I mean, it's cool because what you're saying is true, but it doesn't necessarily apply to all Europeans. You know, you have Europeans who have certain intentions in mind. When you talk about certain things regarding history, just like you have black people that do the same thing. So it's not, for me, it's not necessarily whether it came from a European or not. It's all based around intent and purpose. But with that being said, I want to bring up the point you made about Hypatia and what Jabari said happened. All I'm gonna say is in regards to that is that you actually read the narrative of Hypatia and what really happened in regards to her being killed, because it's not what Jabari says it is, and I'm gonna leave it at that. But
well, I'm not going off the story account. I'm going off the historical account. So I feel what you're saying, but she still was killed because a Christian lied on her. Would you disagree with that?
Not from what I've seen. He operated under the guise of Christianity, but what he did was not necessarily Christ-like, and he did it for his own personal gain.
And see that now, this I like this about you though, bro, because I like how you say these people weren't necessarily Christians, but and this is my point. If we had a time machine and we went back in time and we asked anybody, is Cyril of Alexandria a Christian? We would have a hell of a time convincing him and anybody else that he wasn't a Christian. You see what I'm saying? So it's easy to say from the point of view of history that we had that he wasn't a Christian, but this man believed with his whole heart that he was a Christian, and the people who followed him believed he was a Christian. And so now we got in 2020, we got the foresight and the hindsight to say he wasn't a Christian, but he definitely thought that he was a Christian, and so did his followers. And so what he did, yeah, for personal gain, but he also did it because he felt that Hypatia was a heathen who deserved to die. And so my point being that these were the attitudes of these so-called Christians who came into the continent. Like it's inescapable. Cyril of Alexandria wasn't the only one who felt this way. And so I know we try to reconcile it by saying, well, they must not have been a Christian or they couldn't have been a Christian, but they firmly believed that they were.
So let me ask you this in regards to that. If these people, because we both know what Christianity is and what it's about, what the tenets are. If these people truly in their hearts believe that they were Christian, why would they commit an act such as that?
That's my point, because it's my assertion that there is something hateful in the European when it comes to indigenous African cultures and beliefs. And it is something deeply rooted in the European that makes them lash out and reject anything that's in disagreement with whatever it is that they putting forth. We can look at today and see that that's the case. Look how fervently people support Donald Trump, who is a buffoon. He just rich, but he's a buffoon. But you have people who fervently defend this man and his actions because that's what they do. That's one thing that has not changed. And so this is a European thing. I'm not saying that it's an inherently Christian thing. It's a European thing because these were European Christians. And I don't know how we can get around that. And so I'm not telling you that Christianity is bad. I'm not saying that is good, or that's not my argument at this point. I'm saying that these Europeans who came into the continent did not have good intentions towards our people, whether they were Christian or not.
Well, I mean, you can say that because some of them did not, and that's pretty obvious, but I'm not going to.
Talking about a majority of them did not. You said some. If we look at the evidence, it was a majority. Look at apartheid in South Africa. Look at the genocide across the continent in the name of Islam and Christianity. And tell me I'm wrong about that. Look at, again, when we look at the oppressor in this country, in South America, in Haiti, in Puerto Rico, this is what they do. In Australia, where the Tanzanian Aborigines are gone, they are extinct, they no longer exist. So again, these are facts. This is what they do. And so look at the history of the Native Americans in this country. So I'm not it's not hyperbole. This is what happens when they deem you unworthy of their society that they trying to build. And what is their society predicated on? Supposedly. It's supposedly predicated on Christian beliefs and values. So how can you have a society built on Christian beliefs and values, yet you don't value human life? It's amazing. So that's a problem with them. Clearly, it's a problem with them because the belief don't even line up with what they doing. And I'm not gonna cut you off no more.
Nah, what you're saying is correct. You know what I'm saying? You can't deny that. You know, but dang, I forgot where I was going with my statement. Talking about how
you were saying that I can't say, or no one can really say that all Europeans had ill intent, and that's pretty much where I had cut you off.
Oh yeah, because I mean nobody really can, because that's making an absolute statement without absolute knowledge. You know, you can say most, you know what I'm saying, but you can't say all. But I do get what you're saying about how the European came and you know what he did on the continent. But a lot of what's not brought up is in some of these stories about these missionaries, what they saw the Africans doing to each other. And I'm not talking about slavery. You know, I'm talking about the fact that in some African traditions, and I'm not making no excuses, I'm just telling you what the narrative states, that some African tribes, if a woman gave birth to twins, they saw it as a bad omen. And as a result, they killed the twins. Now, some European Christian missionaries claim that it was actually the gospel that stopped them from perpetuating their practice. So that's just one example of what I was trying to get across earlier. But again, I get what you're saying. So in regards to some of the points that were made in your interview with Jamal, because I think we kind of went all the way left on that, but
yeah, we did.
Yeah, but I mean it's cool though. That type of stuff happens. He made the statement that the church teaches us to devalue ourselves, and I think he based that, or you based that on Isaiah 64th chapter and the 6th verse, I believe. And I don't necessarily think that scripture was meant to evoke any type of devaluation within ourselves. It was basically a calling out of our sinful nature, which we all have. So, like I said, I think there's some misconceptions about certain passages and what those passages are relaying. So there's that, and I don't know if you have anything to say in response to that, but
Well, I'll say this: when it comes to, I think I can't speak for the brother, and I'm gonna see if he want to do his own sort of response. But I'll say this with regards to what I believe. Now, the scripture that says our righteousness is unto filthy rags. We all fall short. We all have a sinful nature. And now some of these are scriptures, some of these are just sayings, right? Or beliefs or tenets, etc. Like all of these statements are devaluing, whether we want to admit it or not. Now you say that it's a extrapolation on our sinful nature, but who's to say that we have a sinful nature? Who's to say that this just isn't, that this is just not a part of being human and having a human experience? And some things we have to overcome and other things we don't. You know, it's just part of being who we are and part of our process. Why does it have to be a quote unquote sin? And that's the thing. We're born into sin. And then we say that it's because two people who we ain't never met, ain't never known nothing about, because they sinned. And that's that's the explanation as to why we supposedly born into this sin. And so it does teach you to devalue yourself. And the reason I say that is because, again, like I was telling the brother, my cousin worked 15-hour, 12-hour days so that he could take his family on a vacation. And when he did it, because his wife had an ungrateful attitude about it, he sort of got frustrated and started to talk about it. I worked all these hours and I worked so hard to make this happen for our family, and this the attitude you're giving me? And her statement was, you didn't do nothing, God did it. Well, God ain't clock in. So how God do it? Right? My wife has a master's degree, a bachelor's degree, and a master's degree. She done got like 4 promotions at her job. And she don't talk about what she did or how she got through it, and she worked hard and she did all that. God did it. God took them classes and passed all them exams and took them finals and did them dissertations and all of that. Right? So somebody then was in an accident and somebody, two or three people died and 2 people didn't. And the 2 people who didn't die say God is the reason they survived. Well, what was the reason the other people died? This is why I say it teaches us to devalue ourselves, because at some point I got to give myself credit for the work I put in or the work I did. But instead, I'm supposed to give it to God. That makes no sense to me. And so that's what I mean by it. Again, what the brother meant, I give him a chance to extrapolate on that at another time. But for me, that's what I mean about it demeans you, because it pushes a narrative that you owe whatever it is you've gotten accomplished to someone else. The floor is yours.
Well, I get where you're coming from, but in regards to our sinful nature, why not point it out? Because as a species, we are the most problematic inhabitants of this earth. So, and it's evident because there's schisms between humans and humans, humans and nature, which is the cause of a lot of the ecological problems that we are now facing with climate change and things of that nature. So why not call out our sinful nature? Why not make us look at ourselves for what we truly are, because no man walking this earth can say that they're above or without a sinful nature. The best way to either improve something or eradicate something or try to eradicate something is to confront it. So I don't think it's so much of a devaluing, but a painting of a real portrait of ourselves. Stuff that we don't even want to address, stuff that we don't want to stop doing because it feels good to our flesh. And we know that the flesh is pretty much hostile to God. So that's where I stand with that. But with the other point you brought up about the guy and his wife giving all the credit to God, I don't think it was I think what she should have done was thank God for giving her husband the ability to work those hours so that they could go on a nice vacation and have a good time. Now, when you just say you didn't do it, God did it, that's at face value, that doesn't really sound like something that's very encouraging to the man who put in the work. So I get where you're coming from. She should have worded her statement better and gave thanks to God for giving her husband the ability to do what he did in order for them to go on a nice vacation. And the same with your wife. Her achievements, she's thanking God for giving her the ability to do these things. And I do that too. I thank God, everything I learn, everything I'm able to share, I do give credit to God ultimately, because he's the ultimate reference point for my ability to do these things, because without God, I can't really, how can I function? How can I have my being without God? So, that's all I got to say on it.
Yeah, I get that, but that's the very reason why I say it diminishes you, and so we have to reference something that's quote unquote higher than ourselves, so to speak. And again, those were just a couple of examples. But let me ask you this, because I know you basically dismiss Islam because of its stance on Jesus and just basically considering him one of the prophets. Now, I got a brother, and not my natural brother, but I'm just saying a brother in general. I've known this guy my whole life. When he was here in St. Louis, he found himself in a really bad way. Drugs, alcohol, living in his parents' house, etc. Decided to leave and go to Texas. And he, over-the-road truck driver, he bought his own truck, got him a place to stay, got a couple of cars and a couple of trucks and a Mercedes-Benz. He's doing well, clean and sober. He gives all credit to Allah. He's a member of the NOI. Now, what's my point? One thing that I find with Christians is that they seem to believe that Christianity is the end all be all. And that's what they believe, that's what they believe. But if Allah can do that for him, how can you dismiss Allah?
How can I dismiss Allah? That's basically him giving reverence to the deity he believes in, right?
No doubt.
So where does me dismissing Allah come into play?
Well,
because I know that.
That's my point. So clearly Islam is working for him and many others. I also have an uncle. Now, this is my blood uncle, my mother's brother, who was on drugs for as long as I can remember. He joined the Nation of Islam and he became clean and sober. Now it's my belief that he just wanted to do it and he did it. But in his mind, it was Allah. And so who am I to argue with the man and say it wasn't Allah? So my point to you and to any other Christian would be, how can you dismiss Allah as the truth if he can do that for these individuals? And so while Christianity works for you, clearly Islam is working for them. So who's to say that Islam is wrong? Not to say that Christianity is wrong, but who's to say Islam isn't right and exact? You understand what I'm saying? In other words, there are many different beliefs and interpretations on God. Who's to say Christianity is the end all be all if these other interpretations are actually working to the benefit of the people who practice them?
That's actually a good question. And that's actually something that I plan on looking into as soon as I get the chance. Now, for me to try to denounce the God that he follows, which is Allah, I would have to actually study the nature of Allah and if Allah, as an Islamic deity, is able to do that. If I find out that he's not able to do that, then it becomes a problem for his claim or for who he's giving reverence to. But I don't know that that's in his nature because I haven't studied Allah.
Now here's the issue though. Having not studied it, so now do you believe that Christianity, or let me say this, you believe that Jesus is the one true way to God?
Of course.
So if you believe that, then that automatically, summarily denies Islam or any other religious belief. Would you agree with that?
From a standpoint of the way to God, yeah.
Right. So in other words, if these other religious beliefs don't believe that Jesus is the only way to God, then they don't qualify as being the true path, so to speak. And so that being the case, then they automatically or sort of disqualified from the conversation. But again, if they actually work for people, how can they be disqualified? And to put it in layman terms, if Christianity is the end all be all of religious beliefs and concepts, which I think most Christians would say that's the case. If that is the case, how then would a Christian explain how these other religious beliefs, be it Kemet, Islam, or otherwise, actually work for the betterment of the people who practice them?
I think in order for that question to be answered accurately, you would have to narrow it down to what aspect of life are these other ideologies working for people in, because you can be a follower of Kemetic spirituality and, get blessed with a whole heap of material wealth. And that will lead you to believe that Kemetic spirituality works for you.
Okay.
But on the other hand, if you're obtaining all this material wealth and you think it's because of the ideology that you follow, but at the same time, spiritually, you're not being nourished and you're not being fed, just hypothetically, then how exactly is Kemetic spirituality working for you? And that could be said about Islam as well, just from a hypothetical standpoint, because again, I don't know a whole lot about Islam. I don't know a whole lot about the nature of their God. I really don't know a whole lot about Kemet and the nature of their God, and if their God is able to even bless people from a material standpoint. So I think it's a lot of factors that go into answering that question.
I feel like you're ducking my question, bro. I feel like you're ducking my question. But I'm going to accept your answer. But I do feel like you ducking, I got to tell you. Now,
How?
Because it's a simple answer. It's yes or no. It's either you feel that they insufficient in comparison to Christianity or they not.
But how can I feel that way if I haven't even studied the ideology to compare to Christianity in the first place?
Because if Jesus Christ is the only path to God, then how can any other religion suffice?
The only way I can really answer that question is to tell you that based on what I know from Jesus Christ being the only way is because he fulfilled everything he said he was going to do. And with that, he changed people that were ardent skeptics to what he was doing and what he said he was going to do. And in some cases, they were persecutors of the people that he followed. So in that regard, if Christ isn't who he said he is, then what changed these people?
Well, I'm not questioning anything that Jesus did or didn't do. What I'm questioning is, how can a Christian say that? Because, you know, we talked about it before, how I've heard, you know, preachers say Muhammad didn't get up and Buddha didn't get up and etc. Right? And even when they come to Kemet, since they don't know a lot about it, they'll say these new beliefs and this and that, right? And so with those statements being made, if Allah is actually helping people get better and living a more fulfilling and healthy life, how can anyone then say that Jesus is the only way? Because clearly Allah is doing something for these people who following Islam. Like, this man is no longer a drug addict. He's no longer an alcoholic. He has a sustained and well-paying job. He has a house of his own, multiple cars. And that didn't happen by osmosis. And if he's giving Allah the credit for it, then clearly there must be something to it.
I get you. And I would say that what he did was, and how he cleaned himself up was he followed the tenets associated with Islam.
And so you would give those tenets credence then. Even
Yeah, like I said in our last discussion, the tenets of Islam, or the Nation of Islam, produce strong black men, strong black women, and strong black children. It got, from a psychological standpoint, it cleaned people up. It got men off of drugs and out of gangs. It got women out of a life of prostitution and things of that nature. So I'm not going to deny that part of Islam. I can't.
So Allah can be good for people now.
Well, I was referring to the tenets. I'm not referring to whether Allah can actually change a person, because, like I said, I don't know the nature of Allah to say that.
Question, bro. That was a trick question. I was trying to get you in a box, and you wouldn't let me get you in that box, and that's why if you listen to that interview with Brother Jamal, I gave you props. So and this is another reason why I give you props, because you was not gonna let me put you in a box. So I definitely respect it. So. Was it anything else in the interview? Because I know I also said this, and I don't know if you was gonna get to it, but one thing I said is that people tend to say, I hear this all the time, even now. The Lord told me to tell you X, Y, Z. And one of the things about that got me thinking is, like, the people who say that to me, and I'm looking at it from maybe because I'm looking at it from a natural standpoint, is is perhaps the problem, because I'm like, okay, you spending all this time with God, to the fact that he telling you to tell all these people, including myself, all these different things. What is he telling you about you? Because I don't see nothing about your life improving. You still sick. You still ain't got no money. And you still relatively unhealthy. But God telling you to tell other people stuff. And if that's the case, what am I missing? And so I made the statement that being somebody who write poetry, if I spent a half hour with Sonia Sanchez or Gil Scott-Heron, I believe I come out a better poet. Or if a Chris Brown spent time with Michael Jackson, Prince, or James Brown, he'll come out a better performer. What say you with regards to that? God can give you a revelation to tell somebody else, but he ain't giving you nothing. He's telling you what to tell somebody else to improve their life, but he ain't telling you nothing to improve your life.
In regards to that, I would say that hypothetically, if God is giving them revelation about themselves, in addition to a revelation he may have given them about you personally, and it doesn't seem like it's working, it may be because the person is not adhering to the revelation that's given to them by God, but he goes out of his way to tell you what God told him about you. You know, and I think, and I don't know if you're going this direction with it, if a pastor tells you that God told him that you need to improve this area of your life, but this pastor himself is a habitual drinker, and it doesn't seem like he's getting revelation from God that he should stop drinking because he hasn't stopped. Is that where you were going with it?
That's a good example. I mean, I wasn't talking about a pastor in particular, but that's a good example of what I'm talking about.
Well, I'll put it like this, and I hope this answer suffices. This man, as a pastor and as a follower of Christ, period, knows that he's not supposed to drink. That when you give your life to Christ, your body is automatically a temple. Once you receive the Holy Spirit, your body is automatically a temple. So for you to pollute it with liquor or even cigarettes, marijuana, you're doing a not only a disservice to yourself, but you're grieving the Holy Spirit. And if the Holy Spirit is giving you revelation that you should stop, because there's nothing constructive about being a habitual drinker, and you don't stop, but you can sit up in the pulpit for an hour and tell other people how they should live their lives, it shows that you're actually being hypocritical, because you can't really tell somebody that they're drenched or immersed in sin, but at the same time, you got this thorn in your side that you can't seem to shake. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah, that's kind of, it's like, come on, man. But yeah, I don't now. Is it possible to get you and you and Brother Jamal on for a discussion on some of these matters with regards to his I guess knocks on Christianity?
Yeah, I think we could have a small conversation about his objections to Christianity, and I mean, I know a lot of it is rooted in what Europeans did historically, and I wouldn't say that I disagree with him on that, because some things and some of the concepts they came up with, and at the same time they claim to be Christian, still gets me upset when I think about it. For example, the concept of inherent heathenism. That's something that they placed on our ancestors, and these people were supposed to be Christian. They said that we didn't have souls, so we couldn't be baptized. Things like that. So I see where you coming from, and I see where Brother Jamal is coming from, some of his assertions too. And I can only hope that any answer I give him is good enough to kind of quell his skepticism.
Yeah, one thing I enjoy about you, and I enjoy about Brother Antoine as well, is y'all both methodical in y'all explanation. Whether I agree or not, y'all definitely methodical and thorough with the information y'all lay down. And so one can never accuse you of not, putting all the information forth. And it's just up to the beholder to comb through it and try to determine whether or not they agree with it. So yeah, I definitely try to get that scheduled and see what we can do about just having a sort of not necessarily a debate, but sort of a moderated discussion where you take 5 minutes, and just kind of hash out some of his objections and some of your counterpoints or defenses, so to speak.
Okay, that's cool. That's cool. I had one more thing I wanted to kind of bring up. I know it's getting kind of late, so I'm gonna try to be quick with what I'm gonna bring up. But I think near the end of y'all discussion, with you and Jamal, you quoted James Small, and I think it was along the lines of the concept of physical immortality.
Okay.
Okay, I was making sure I was correct. But
yeah, Professor James Small says that you're not looking. We, from an African perspective, we don't look to get eternal life from a god or a deity. We get it whenever we pass our seed on. So in other words, like my son and my grandson, etc. And I personally can relate to that now, having grandchildren. I mean, I'm only 43, but I have 2 grandchildren, and my grandmother played a very pivotal role in my life. And for my grandkids to know who she is very important to me. Just as it is for my kids to know who she is. And I'm keeping her alive that way. And so when the way he break it down, I definitely I'm definitely in agreement with it. But what are your objections to it?
This is actually something that I read in a book called The Wisdom of African Mythology. It touches on the concept of physical immortality through reproduction. Um, my only question is that actually a genetic possibility? Because I understand that when you have offspring, they share some of your characteristics, they share some of your biological makeup, you know what I'm saying, things of that nature. But for James White to kind of conflate that with the eternal life from a spiritual perspective, I don't necessarily see how the two can correlate, because it's like once you pass on, that's it. It's not like you're somehow living another life through your offspring. That's not. I don't think that's possible. So,
Well,
I may be wrong in my interpretation of what he was saying or what you were saying, but that's kind of where I'm at.
well, yeah, I think you sort of because you're still thinking about it, and no offense, I think you're still thinking about it from a spooky standpoint, and it's not spooky at all. It's very much from a carnal or a natural, I think is a better word, standpoint. And here's why I say that. Because we not looking to say, hey, I, Piankhi, Ptah, Mutulu, Nefer, Amun-Ra, I still exist within the confines of the way I always did. No, what I'm saying is this is me. This is not Professor James Small. This is me. Remnants of me, however, like once I leave this plane of existence, remnants of me will definitely echo my son. Because if you talk to my son, he's 12, he'll be 13 on the 4th of February. And you might as well be talking to me. And that's just the truth. And, it's kind of strange at times, but he definitely has, and not from an African paradigm standpoint, because that's not something that I think that's not a decision that he would make at 12. Um, but from the way he talks, what he talks about, how he talks, his vocabulary, you might as well be talking to me. His attitude. And so when I leave this earth, when I no longer exist, remnants of me will still exist through him, through my daughters, through my grandchildren. That's what I mean, and that's what I believe Professor James Smalls mean. I don't think we mean it I definitely don't mean it in the literal sense as if I'm being reincarnated through them. It just means that in essence, it's kind of like Tupac's music keeps him alive. My memory will keep me alive, so to speak. Or what I've deposited inside of them will be deposited inside of their offspring and their offspring's offspring. The same way what my grandmother deposited in me, I've deposited in them, and so forth and so on. That's what I think he means. That's definitely what I mean. Because I believe
Okay.
once I don't believe I like to me, heaven and hell are conditions right here on earth. I'm not looking for anything beyond this point. One of the things that my wife struggles uh, with me being conscious is she believes in a literal heaven and hell. So she worries that I'm gonna end up in hell. And I literally have no concerns about that whatsoever. I believe when you did, you did. And so, uh, but I do believe that we carry with us pieces of those who were significant in our lives, whether we were related to them or not. But particularly those who we were related to, because I know with my grandmother, I carry her with me every day, and it is sort of reverberates to my children, particularly my 15-year-old daughter. And so, that's kind of what I mean. Not reincarnation in the literal sense, but in the metaphorical or in the ideological sense that who I am, who I was in essence, will can sort of continue on through them.
Okay, I can understand your stance on it. I just don't necessarily see why, because like I said, I read about it too, and that's how I know the concept of physical immortality comes through reproduction. But I just don't understand why he would insinuate the spiritual concept of eternal life, which meaning life after death.
Well, I think
that's just something I don't.
I think he's sort of trying to get people out of that sort of that line of thought, so to speak. And I could be wrong, but that was what I took from it. It's like, stop thinking that it's something beyond this point. And that could be again another discussion, because I've heard it's funny that I like people who have died and been brought back. I've heard some say they saw nothing, and then I've heard others say they saw white light and this and that. So it's hard to call it reliable is questionable, because were they conscious? How cognizant were they? How do we know were they dreaming? Like what was it that they actually saw and experienced? And so that what happens when we are no more is, to me, a mystery that you don't experience until you are no more. So, but it's kind of like my granddaughter, who probably met my grandmother once, and she wouldn't have been old enough to remember. But when she see the picture of me and my grandmother, she said, "Papa, that's you and your Gigi?" And I'm like, "Yeah." So that's what I mean. And it's just more or less never letting those who are important to you be forgotten by those who remain, who are important to you. And so my relationship with my grandkids is hugely impacted and predicated on my relationship with my grandmother. Like, I'm trying to be the best grandfather I could be, because I feel like I had the best grandmother ever. And I owe it to my grandchildren to give them what she gave me. And by doing that, I feel like I'm keeping her, or at the very least, her memory alive. And so, and again, from the African perspective, your ancestors are key in your life and in your development, whether they're alive or whether they moved on, or transition, so to speak. So I think what Professor James Smalls was saying, you can kind of, you can look at it a couple of ways, and it's all open to interpretation. Did he literally mean that you are reincarnating yourself through your seed, or did he just mean that sort of your memory, keeping your memory alive, keeps you alive? It's just in the perspective of whoever looking at it.
yeah, I feel you, man, and I like the way you put it. And I can agree with you and your stance on it, in regards to this concept. But as far as what happens when we die, I know that's another topic for another show or another recording. But just number one, I do believe that our consciousness, its origins are immaterial, and when we die, our consciousness we're still conscious. We're not alive physically, but our consciousness is still at work. So I believe that there's a immaterial destination for each one of us when we pass on and transition. And I don't base that on just what I've heard, but I base that on what I've experienced myself. Now, I've never had a near-death experience myself, but I have had a number of spiritual encounters, which lets me know that this physical realm isn't all there is, and there is a realm beyond this one. And one of the other reasons why my Christian conviction is so strong is because all of these spiritual experiences line up with what I read in Scripture. So, and even when I was in the conscious community, God was showing me the church. He showed me the church at least 3 or 4 times. He showed me walking into a church. And I kind of brushed it off at first because I was like, well, maybe that's just my guilt, my subconscious guilt, because I left the church. I no longer follow the Bible. So I was thinking it was that initially, but I realized that God was showing me my destiny, or where I was going to be in the not too distant future.
Yeah, and I've shared with you and Brother Antoine. I've had spiritual experiences, and I don't dismiss the spiritual realm at all. Again, from an African perspective, spirituality is a real and literal plane of existence. However, whether or not we become one with that existence when we transition, whether our consciousness continue, like that's a mystery that I have yet to know or dive into, and I think we can do a whole show on that. Like, I really think that'll be a good teaching that you can just go ham on a future show. Just go solo, where I just kind of let you teach, extrapolate on some of the things that you've experienced and been through, and how it lines up with Scripture. Kind of give me the scriptures ahead of time so I can share them on the screen and just go in. I think that'll be a powerful video.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like a bad idea, man, because I've also looked into what's called near-death experience research, and I found out a lot of different and interesting things in regards to that particular subject. And I can say that a lot of the attestations to experiences outside of the body and experiences after death, some of them are actually compelling. So that is something that we could set up for a later time.
Absolutely. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and let you close out, bro. And we definitely have to do this again. before you close out, if there's anything else you want to address or need me to address, let me know. Otherwise, go ahead and close out, and we'll figure out another day and time where we can do this again.
Okay, cool. I'm pretty much out of objections, so I'm gonna go ahead and close out. As always, well, this is my second time on Paradigm Shift TV, but again, I enjoyed the discussion. I enjoyed building with my brother Piankhi, and I look forward to future discussions and teachings going forward.
Absolutely, absolutely, brother. It's always an honor to build with you and have these discussions and dialogues with you, and I look forward to more in the future. As I said, I want you to be a mainstay on the program. I like the perspective you bring. I like the clarity you bring, and looking forward to more encounters and debates and discussions and teachings from the conscious Christian Jerome Green. So that's it for now, family. We'll check back in with you on the next trip. Until then, this has been Paradigm Shift TV 314. I am Piankhi Ptah Mutulu, Nefer Amun-Ra, your host. And for all my family out there, hotel peace, God bless, and we'll see you on the other side.